and YouTube. So welcome to everyone who's joining us on social media. Just going to take another couple seconds to let people get connected. All right. So my name is Geneva Blackmer, and I'm the Program Director for the Interfaith Center located at the Miami University campus in Oxford, Ohio. And our mission is to invite people of diverse religious, spiritual, and secular worldviews to participate in one another's practices in order to cultivate appreciative understanding and to build friendships and relationships, as well as to unify them around common moral, social, and ethical concerns in order to build a more just and equitable society. And I'm really happy to welcome Kara here with us today from the Myamia Center. She is a graduate assistant, or she joined the Myamia Center as a graduate assistant in 2016. Sorry about that. In 2018, she earned her master's degree at Miami in Student Affairs and Higher Education and joined the Myamia Center staff as a full-time employee. In January 2020, she formally transitioned into the role of Director of Miami Tribe Relations. Could you watch that waiting room a little bit, because I see some more people are coming in, sorry. Originally from Huntington, Indiana, Kara attended the University of Notre Dame and graduated in 2011. While at Notre Dame, she worked extensively with the Native American Student Association and started thinking about ways to support Native American students and the college experience. This is what made her think about student affairs as a field of study, and she's excited to be working with her own Myaamia community here in Oxford. Her graduate studies focused on student development theory and specifically how these theories can be applied to make Miami students successful in their college endeavors. Her work at the center includes working with students in a variety of ways, such as outreach to the broader Miami University community, planning for programs and conferences, and serving as a co-advisor to the Miami Native American Student Association. I'm really happy that you're all here with us today, and welcome to everyone on Zoom and YouTube and Facebook. And Kara, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
No way, thank you. Aya cheke te pewini ala kako ke awaha nungi ka kikwe, ma kunza kwa wains wa ane, nila miamikuya, me ke mo ane miamia Neepwaantinki kaninge. So hi everyone, it's really nice to see you here tonight. My name is Kara Strass, and as my introduction said, I work at the Myamia Center here at Miami University, and I will talk with you a little bit about the work of the Myamia Center a little bit later. I am going to share some slides with you all. So I titled this presentation, Neepwaantiinki, Learning from Each Other. This is a phrase that we use here at Miami University to really represent this relationship and how we feel that both sides of the relationship learn from each other. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that learning entails as we move forward. But just to provide a really brief overview of what I'm going to talk about tonight, I'm always start these presentations with Miami tribe history. I think it's really important to understand that history and where we've come from in order to understand who we are today and the work that we do and what our plans are moving forward. I'll speak a little bit to the language and cultural revitalization, which is the primary work of the Myamia Center. And I want to mention that we will be celebrating our 50th anniversary of this relationship in 2022, and then talk about a few ways that you can learn more or engage with the Myamia Center moving forward. So I like to start with this image, which is of a beaded vest. This was actually beaded by my aunt, Katrina Mitten, who's a wonderful beadwork artist who travels around the country with her beadwork. But this is her imagining of, for us, what is our coming out story. Some people might call it, we call it our emergent story, the story that tells us how we ended up, especially in our homelands. In the beginning of that story says, at first the Myaamia emerged from the water. The place where they came out is called the coming out place. And so this is just a reminder, especially to members of our community, and I see a couple of folks in the in the audience, some of my Myaamia relatives. This reminds us of that story. And now this image is represented actually in our tribal headquarters on the back wall of who we are and where we come from. So we say that we have been in our traditional homelands since time immemorial, since time out of mind, or as long as anyone can remember. And so I wanted to show a map of those homelands, and they include the entire states of Illinois and Indiana, the western half of Ohio, a pretty good chunk of Wisconsin, and then a really small slice of Michigan. That's obviously a very large area, but our heartlands, or where most of our permanent village sites were located, was in this red oval here. So for any of you who might know the geography of northern Indiana, that's the Wabash River Valley from what's today about Fort Wayne down to Lafayette, Indiana. And so that's where the majority of our permanent village sites were, and where many Myaamia people still live today. And then just to orient you a little bit, this blue dot down here, that's Oxford. So Oxford, Ohio, where Miami University is located, is within the traditional homelands of the Myaamia people. And that's one of our connections to each other. For us, it would have been prime hunting ground, but certainly a space that we also shared with other tribal nations. And I wanted to point that out on this map as well, that these homelands are not nation states in the way that we think of nation states today. There are no hard boundaries, and it is a shared landscape. So I'm, point out that there are several other tribal nations who are listed on this map. For those of you who are in Ohio, you might recognize some of these names: the Shawnee, the Wyandot, Ottawa, and many other groups who we shared this homeland with. And for most of them, we had very kinship-based ties to them. So for example, the Shawnee, we call our elder brothers, and we understood what it meant to be located in this shared space, where we would interact with each other for hunting and trading and many other reasons. And you might just take note of a few of those names because they will pop up here in a couple more slides as well. So I know this map has a lot going on, but I include it because it represents the treaties that we signed with the United States government. So the first treaty that we signed, the Treaty of Greenville, was signed in 1795, and that ceded a pretty good chunk of Southern Ohio, including the land where Miami University is located. So that's down here, this red or this pinkish section. So that was our first treaty. As Americans pushed westward into our homelands, we at first tried to prevent that from happening through war. And then eventually, when that was no longer feasible for our community, we started signing these treaties. And over the span of about 50 years, we ceded the vast majority of our homelands. And so that's what this map is showing, is these different treaties where we ceded different portions of this homeland until the last piece was actually this yellow square in the middle, the Great Miami Reserve, which went from about Indianapolis, or just north of Indianapolis, up the Wabash River Valley. That was ceded in the last treaty prior to removal in 1840. And so what we like to point out with this map is, we have been in this homeland since time immemorial. This is our home. This is where we know how to live and support ourselves, especially ecologically. And in the span of 50 years, this homeland, is ceded to the United States. And then in 1846, we are removed from this homeland. So, when we signed the treaty, the last treaty that agreed to removal, or in theory agreed to removal in 1840, we thought that Myaamia people were going to be able to live on land that was held in common among the community. And so we were actually able to do that for 6 years after that treaty was signed. And there were 5 families who were exempted from that removal. And we thought eventually we would be able to exempt all Myaamia people. But that didn't happen. And in 1846, the Indian agent called in the army from Cincinnati to enforce the terms of the removal treaty. And about just over 300 Myaamia people were forcibly loaded onto canal boats starting in Peru, Indiana in October. And they traveled along the canal system, both through Indiana and then down through Ohio. And for those of you who are here in Oxford, again, another connection to this area is that these canal systems run just about 13 miles from campus. And in 1846, in October, we are fairly certain that classes were in session at that time. And so there are students here at this university as our Myaamia community is being forcibly relocated from this land. Once they arrive in Cincinnati, these Myaamia people are loaded then onto steamships and go out the Ohio, Mississippi, and Missouri rivers to about what's today Kansas City, Missouri, and then travel 50-ish miles south to the first reserve, which was in Kansas. This whole process repeats itself a second time when after the Civil War and after Kansas becomes a state, they want to remove all Native people from the state of Kansas into Indian Territory, or what today is known as Oklahoma. And so Myaamia people are again forcibly removed. The first removal happened in 1846. So for those of you who are good at math, this is the 175th year since that removal. So as a community, we are commemorating this history. And it's, again, important to us as a people to be able to understand this history. And it is by no means a celebration. It's a very dark time in our history, something that we really have to deal with, but something that we think is important to address as a community in order to heal from this trauma of the past. So if we take a look at a map of Oklahoma today, there are almost 40 tribal nations in the state of Oklahoma. And if we zoom in there on the northeast corner, where the Miami tribe is headquartered in Ottawa County, you start to see that there are lots of different tribal nations all living very close together in what used to be Indian Territory, but today is known as Oklahoma. And in Ottawa County, where our tribe is headquartered, there are 9 different tribal nations. And you might remember a couple of these names from our homeland map. The Peoria and the Shawnee, the Ottawa, the Wyandot. These are tribes that we have very, very long relationships with, and that we continue to have relationships with today. And we work together in a lot of ways to help one another and in our interactions as a tribal nation with the state of Oklahoma or with the United States government. So what is the outcome of this history? Because that's really why I wanted to present this kind of really brief Myaamia history to you. And one of the outcomes of this history is that we are a community that lives in diaspora. So we have 3 main population pockets, the largest being in Oklahoma, where the tribe is headquartered. The second largest being in Indiana, where several families were exempted from the first removal and where they've lived since time immemorial, my family being one of those families. And then the third largest population being in Kansas. And at the time of that second removal, tribal citizens were given a choice of whether they went to stay behind in Kansas and relinquish their tribal citizenship and become United States citizens, or to travel to Oklahoma with the tribal nation. At that time, you could not be both a US citizen and a tribal citizen. And so you had to make that decision. So in each of these three places, Myaamia people have been for a long time, and now they're, generations later, we have large Myaamia population pockets in each of these places. But from each of those, Myaamia people have spread out across the entire country. This was sped up, especially during the Great Depression, as people were looking for work. And today we have almost 6,000 tribal citizens, and we live in 49 states. So we are certainly a community in diaspora, one that's geographically separated from one another. And that is one of our challenges in the work that we're doing, but it also helps to understand what led to a decline in language and culture. As people become very geographically separated from each other, they don't have people to speak their language with or to practice their culture with. And that led to a decline in language and culture. There were many different forced assimilation practices used against Myaamia people specifically, but all tribal people. But because of our work with Miami University, we think a lot about education, and the Myaamia children were often taken from their families and sent to boarding schools. So in this picture on the left, this is Freeman Walker, the shorter of the two boys. He is a Myaamia person, and we know that he went to boarding school speaking his Myaamia language, and he came back still being able to speak it. But what was taught at these boarding schools was not to use your language, not to practice tribal culture, to take up a Protestant work ethic, to live on single family, nuclear family plots of land, to go where the work is. And when he came back to the Myaamia community, he did not pass on the language to his children. And so the boarding school really was pretty good at its goal of cutting off transmission of language and culture. So in one generation, very quickly, language and culture can decline. And by the turn of the 20th century, our language was not being taught to children anymore. It became what is known as moribund. And we think that the last speakers of our language passed away sometime between the 1960s and 1980s. So the language went completely silent. Nobody spoke it anymore. And so what we're doing at the Myamia Center is research and educational development to revitalize Myaamia language and culture. And I'll talk with you a little bit more about what that means. So to speed up in time a little bit, to bring us a little bit closer to present day, the relationship between Miami Tribe and Miami University, I told you, is almost 50 years old. It started in 1972. This relationship is very unique. We don't know of any other relationships like it in the United States, primarily because the work that we're doing at the Myamia Center, it is directed by and serves the needs of the Miami Tribe. And that's very important. And we can talk a little bit more about what that means in practice here in a little bit. But we think a lot about why we have this relationship. And in my mind, it comes down to three things that connect us: a shared name, a shared place, and a shared goal for education. The name is the easiest one: Miami Tribe and Miami University. The university was named for the Miami River Valley, and the River Valley was named for the tribe. So while that naming was not directly for our tribal nation, we certainly see it as a shared name. And that was one of the pieces that was important to the start of this relationship. A shared place, I already spoke to you a little bit about how Miami University is within our traditional homelands. And for Myaamia people, it's important to, even come back to our homelands, or for those of us who live here, for our language and cultural revitalization to be taking place here has important meaning. and then a shared goal of education, and we'll certainly talk about that a little bit more. The relationship started completely by accident. It is kind of amazing to think of the fact that everything that has happened up to today really is just because Chief Forrest Olds, the chief of the tribe in 1972, he happened to be in Cincinnati for a conference, and he stopped by Miami University unexpectedly. So he went to the president's office, and the president at that time, President Shriver, he was out that day. But some folks took him to meet the alumni office. They took him to football practice. And this really started what for a couple of decades was individual relationships, often between the chief of the tribe or some of our elected officials and with individuals at Miami University. So presidents of the university, the Alumni Association, a few faculty who would have folks come and do educational sessions and those types of things. And that really was what was happening for the first really 2 decades of this relationship. But in the late 80s and early 90s, the question started coming up within our Myaamia community of, if we're doing this education at Miami University of the Miami students, could we have education for our Myaamia community? And so in 1991, the Myaamia Heritage Program began when the first 3 Myaamia students arrived at Miami University. And this picture here on the bottom shows our first 3 students. On the left, those are the first 3 Myaamia students who attended Miami University. And when they arrived here, there wasn't much here for them other than some financial aid to, help them through the process. So 2 of them graduated. The woman in the middle here, she was very, very homesick, and she left after the first year. But her son is now at Miami University, and he's the first, 2nd generation Myaamia person. And so, this is most definitely an ongoing and multi-generational process within our community, which is very exciting. So a couple of the largest outcomes of this relationship, and the first is our students, and I just talked to you about the first 3 students. But today we have 30 Myaamia students who attend Miami University. And this picture is a little bit old. Unfortunately, we don't do very many group pictures today because of COVID. But we now have 30 students, and we have 95 graduates of this program. So it started out very small, and it's continually grown basically year after year. It almost gets bigger every single year. And our students, they have the opportunity to learn about their Myaamia identity while getting an education at Miami University. We're studying contemporary topics and sovereignty. Next year, we'll be studying ecological perspectives and history. And then in the 3rd year of our rotation will be language and culture. And then in their senior year, these students do an independent study project where they combine what they've learned in their major or minor with what they've learned in the heritage courses, and they create a project that gives back to our community in some way. In addition, we do a lot of advising and support for these students. They could be office workers in our office. They can be counselors at our summer youth programs. We take trips together, we do workshops. And so there are many, many ways for these students to engage with Myaamia language and culture during their 4 years. And we've started evaluating the outcomes of this program. So the classes that I mentioned, they started in 2003, so a little over a decade after our first Myaamia students came. And prior to 2003, the graduation rate for our Myaamia students was about 50%. Since 2003, our graduation rate is 92%. And so we feel that the support that we can provide and creating a culturally relevant context for these students, having a Myaamia community here for them allows them to be, more successful educationally. The second main outcome is the creation of the Myamia Center, which started in 2001 and serves the needs of our Myaamia community and partner communities, primarily by focusing on language and cultural revitalization. And I told you that our language went silent in the mid-20th century. Nobody was speaking it. But in the late 80s and early 90s, there were several folks within the tribe who were interested in learning more about the language and seeing whether they could bring it back. And so that's what we're doing today. And today we teach it within our community. This is a picture of a challenge that we have every summer for folks to learn new words and phrases. And if they do that, then they get these bracelets. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what it means to do language revitalization. And for our community specifically, we do archive-based revitalization. Because we don't have any speakers of the language, we can't go to them to teach us about it. Instead, what we go to are archival sources. And we have about 300 years of language sources of the Miami language, starting mostly with Jesuits who came and lived with Miami people. They thought that it would be beneficial in converting Myaamia people if they could speak our language. And so they created dictionaries and they wrote down lots of cultural information. And then as you move forward in time, you start to enter into contact with anthropologists and linguists, sometimes professional, but also sometimes just people who are interested in languages. And so we have a very large wealth of language archival documents. So here's an example of a page that comes from Dunn in 1909. And I show you these pages just to give you a taste of what this archival documentation process looks like. So we would take a page like this, and we have transcriptionists who then type it into spreadsheets. Depending on the languages that are represented on the page, sometimes we need translators. This one's a little easier since it's in English. And then we have linguists who do the linguistic analysis of the Myaamia language. So I think that becomes, you can see how that process works by looking at a page of documentation like this. And, it seems doable, at least in my mind. But a lot of our documentation looks more like this. So this is a page out of one of the Jesuit era manuscripts. And we have about 1,500 pages of language material like this. This one in particular, I believe, is in Old French and Latin in Myaamia. So we have somebody who translates the Old French for us. And then the archival, the linguistic analysis also has to take place after that. And so, this is a very, very time and labor intensive process that takes many people within our community. And I think we've only gotten through about 30% of this archival documentation. So we think it'll take, probably another generation before we're able to go through all of this material. So, I told you a little bit about then, that process of language revitalization, and that's so important for us to be able to learn the language again and teach it again. But I think what's even more important within our community is the outcomes of language revitalization. And, this all started with a focus on language, but it's moved much more into cultural revitalization and the idea that if we teach different cultural practices and ways of knowing, that we can infuse language throughout each of those. So we have many examples, but one that's depicted in this picture is of Pakitaha-Minge, also known as lacrosse. And we have our own Myaamia version of this game. And so for about 2 decades, we've been revitalizing this within our community, learning to play it again, starting with just learning, normal American rules of the game, playing with metal sticks, and slowly but surely integrating different Myaamia pieces into the game. So we've learned a lot about how our ancestors played this game, the rules of the game. We've learned how to make these Myaamia wooden sticks. So you might see that they have a little bit of a different look to them. They are these circular pockets on the sticks. And slowly but surely, we're integrating this back into our community. And this picture is from 2 summers ago. And this is the first time that our community played with every single person using these wooden sticks in probably close to 200 years. And so this process of language and cultural revitalization is having a very large impact on our community who are learning these cultural practices, but also then integrating them into their lives in a variety of ways and coming to a better understanding of their Myaamia identity. Our work, the reason why it's important that we have this relationship with Miami University and that the work take place here is because we have access to a lot more resources on campus at Miami University than we do even at tribal headquarters in Oklahoma. This is a wonderful example of a partnership that we have with that. I talked to you about this language revitalization process and how labor and time intensive it is. And for a very long time, folks were just working out of spreadsheets and Word documents. And there really was no software that could help with this process. So we decided to create our own. We partnered with folks at computer science, faculty members, as well as students who helped us develop this software system. So the one on the top left is the Indigenous Languages Digital Archive. And we employ graduate assistants from computer science who help us to maintain the software. And it helps speed up the organization and analysis of those archival documents. That information is then fed into other tools, like what's on the bottom right-hand is a picture of our Myaamia dictionary, which is what learners can use to go in and learn new words. It has both the English and Myaamia that you can search, as well as audio files so that you can learn how to say new words as you're learning them. Another example of work that's coming out of the Myamia Center is looking at, Myaamia art forms, including the art form of ribbon work. And so on the left is a picture of a publication that was written by folks at the Myamia Center. Is a photo from an exhibit that we held at Miami University's Art Museum last year. It was unfortunately cut short due to COVID, but it was all focused on ribbon work, and we were able to bring in pieces of ribbon work to be on exhibit there that had not been seen by very many of our community members. And it's so important for us to be able to see these archival materials like ribbon work in order to look at them and evaluate how the ribbon work was done on them so that we can learn from them and teach that process within our community again. This brings me back to the Myaamia Heritage logo. I included this on the first slide, but it was as really an educational platform for how we could teach about this relationship between the tribe and the university. It was designed by a designer from the tribe as well as from the university. And each piece of it is very meaningful. The black diamond on the left-hand side, it represents the Myaamia tribe and our cultural wisdom and ties to our homeland. The right-hand side, the red diamond, represents Miami University, a commitment to gaining knowledge, and we come together in the white diamond in the middle. But the piece that is the most important from my perspective of this logo is the red dot at the center. And it's important for really two reasons. One is what it represents. It represents fire, which is, warm, it's welcoming. We sit around a fire to build community, but if you don't tend a fire, it will go out. And this is a reminder, a visual reminder to both sides of this relationship to do the work to tend it in order for it to continue to grow stronger into the future. The second reason that that dot is so important is because it is the piece that makes this recognizably not a Myaamia ribbon work pattern. And so for those of us who see a lot of Myaamia ribbon work, you're not going to see a circle like that in a pattern. And so we are very specific during the design process. So we wanted to make sure that it was inspired by Myaamia culture, but was not appropriating Myaamia culture. And so the mark itself is used in the from these products actually come back to help support. So the logo itself is up in a few different of the facilities within athletics, and we've been creating these alternate uniforms for athletics to use. One of the things that's really unique about this mark is that it is co-owned by the Miami tribe and Miami University. And for those of you who have, experience at institutions, this is not something that happens very often. It is very rare to co-own a mark like this. And what that means is both the tribe and the university have to approve before it can be used on merchandise, in athletics or on marketing materials. I love using this slide at the end of my presentations, and I am going to wrap up here soon, and we'll open it up to questions. But I think it's really hard to understand what a relationship between a tribal nation and a university means or what that looks like. And there certainly are a lot of legal agreements and, official procedures for how we work together. But if you notice in this picture, for any of you who might know some of these folks, the man kneeling down here is President Crawford, the current president of Miami University. And he's playing a Myaamia game called Mokasina against Chief Langford, the chief of the tribe. From when President Crawford came to Oklahoma in 20, this is what a true relationship looks like. It means getting together, learning from each other, and being willing to get down on the floor and play games together. So we will be celebrating our 50th anniversary in 2022. It will be a year-long celebration that will take place in Miami, Oklahoma, as well as here on campus. And a couple of the things that will happen during that year include the Myaamia Conference, which is a biennial conference that happens every 2 years, and that will be in April of 2022 at Miami University, as well as a fall celebration week that will include events across campus, including on the academic side as well as in athletics, and we're hoping to bring our Myaamia elected officials to campus during that week. And we don't have a calendar yet of all of the events. There will be plenty of events throughout the ship and really celebrate the work that we have done together. And then the final piece is just about how you can learn more. I would recommend the Myamia Center as well as Miami Tribe Relations web pages. There's lots of information about the work of the Myamia Center as well as how the tribe and university work together. The Miami Tribe has their own webpage, and we write a Myaamia community blog that has usually a couple of blog posts that come out each week that focus on Myaamia language and culture, as well as a link to our dictionary in case you're interested in learning any Myaamia language. And I'm happy to share these links out more broadly as well. So with that, Kochima Tawe, ask me questions, and I'll stop share, and hopefully from here we can just feel free to ask me any questions that you might have about the tribe, about our relationship, about the work of the Myamia Center. I'm happy to answer any of those.
Thank you so much, Kara. Actually, already received a couple questions in the chat that came to me directly. The first one says, okay, do you know how many other universities have a partnership with the tribe that came from their area, or what universities or universities who have relationships with the tribes that now live in their area? Are you there? I think your connection might be a little unstable.
Sorry.
Kara, are you there? I can hear you now.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Did you hear the question? Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
Did you hear the question?
I did. So these relationships.
Okay.
I did. These relationships look like a really wide variety of things. There are some places that focus on the academic side of things, so have American Indian Studies programs. And that is certainly a wonderful, place to start. And now today, I think there's much more of a focus on having a connection to tribal nations, especially the ones from the homelands where universities are located. But primarily the ones that I know of are more usually focused on providing scholarships. And obviously that's an important piece of this, but there's very few universities who have relationships that look like ours in two ways. One, that are focused on specific tribal nations. Many of them are more pan-Indigenous or looking across all different tribal nations. And for us, what that means is we can focus just on Myaamia language and culture. And that's an important piece of what we do. And the other thing that is unique about these relationships is that, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. But we don't know of any other relationships that are as specific and unique. I remember what I was going to say. Our work is directed by the tribe. And so it's the tribe is who is deciding what work we do and what we focus on. And we don't know of any other relationships where that is what's happening. There's lots of individual people who work with tribal nations, but usually that's on their own. It's not in a relationship like this.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions coming in the chat. The first one says, what percentage, if that is the right word, must one have in blood to be a member of the tribe? Yeah, I can hear you. Do you see that next question in the chat from Margie?
Yeah, so that's a great question.
Are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
You're still cutting out a little bit. Yes. Okay.
So every tribe um, is able to decide what it means to have people be citizens of our tribal nation. And for Myaamia people, blood quantum is not the way that we measure belonging in our community. Instead, for us, we use descendancy. So you have to be able to prove that you descend from a Myaamia person. And, you know, a lot of people, I think, have this misconception that Native American people that it's hard to, but for us, that's not actually true. All Myaamia people's names were written down several times during the treaty process and during the removal process. And so we know who all of those Myaamia people are. And if you can prove that you descend from one of them, then you can be a member of our tribe. Other communities use blood quantum as a way of determining citizenship, but that is, you know, up to each individual tribal nation how they do that, and that's just not something that we do. And I saw a couple of other questions, one being about Miami University having a financial commitment to students. Again, another great question. We have a cost sharing partnership between the tribe and the university. So the tribe actually pays primarily for the operating budget of the Myamia Center. So most of our salaries and you know, the money it takes to do this language and cultural revitalization is coming from the tribe itself. And then the university provides a space for us on campus. So they provide us our building. And then they also provide a tuition waiver for our students to attend Miami University. So, you know, with 30 students attending, it is actually a fairly large financial pay tuition at Miami University. And, you know, that is, we see it as a really great commitment that they are making to educate our Myaamia students. And the fact that that number just keeps growing, and Miami has yet to tell us that they're going to cap it, I think is an important view of how important they see this relationship being. I also saw a question about timing of Jesuits, whether they were evangelizing and teaching in the 1600s. I am not a historian. I know by the 1700s they were, but I'm sorry. Were you able to hear the last answer about Jesuits in the 1600s?
Yes.
Okay. And then I saw a question that just came through about somebody who lives near Haskell. And actually, Jared just put an answer in there. Jared, my relative, Jared Nally, who's on this call, actually goes to Haskell right now. So I'm sure he would be happy to answer any questions that people might have about that. Tribal colleges and universities are very different than public universities, and are much more focused on educating Native students. And actually, I think in a lot of ways, our work at the Myamia Center reflects what's happening at tribal colleges and universities much more than it does at most other public or private institutions in the United States. So there was also a question that came in about whether tribal citizens are eligible for support such as Social Security and Medicare. And yes, they are. You can think of being a tribal citizen almost as being like a dual citizen. So I am a citizen of my tribal nation and of the United States, and I am able to receive benefits from both of those. So the United States government, you get Social Security, you know, a variety of other things that come from the United States government. And then on the tribe side, we are able to govern in a variety of, and one of those benefits are things like the Indian health centers. So the Indian Health Service, you can think of it as being very similar to veterans health, that it's a separate system that's set up just for Native people. And many of those benefits come through the treaty process, is why they were set up. There are other benefits that come from the tribe, but most of those come from just the economic development and work of the tribe itself. So for us, we own several different companies, and it's actually the revenue from those companies that the tribe uses to, you know, function as a government. And we also have direct benefits to our citizens in a couple of different ways. They provide medical benefits for elders, burial services. There are some additional services for veterans, and then scholarships and some help with educational money for K through 12 students as well. So, you know, it is a different, many folks in the United States don't interact with Native people that often. So I do understand that it can be hard to kind of understand the nuances of all of those. And that's why, you know, I like doing these educational sessions so that folks can learn more information. I don't know, have you been monitoring the questions? Have I missed any of them?
Yeah, one more just came in asking about the schools in Kansas. Do you see that one?
Yeah. Yep. And then I think
Are there other
Jared probably answered that better than I even could. Yeah. So
okay,
there's
we got
several
another one. I think
tribal
that just came in.
colleges and universities.
Go ahead if you want to add to that, to his response.
No, that's all right. I think he answered it even better than I could, just that there are several tribal colleges and universities across the country. Some of them are focused broadly on all Native American students, and then some of them have a little bit of a narrower focus on the tribal nations in their areas. But I did see a question come through about Christianity. And, you know, faith is something that we don't talk a lot about our historically what faith looked like in the Myaamia community, but we certainly have influence of Christianity, but also of other religions within our community. And I wouldn't say that we are trying to purge or reject any individual faith, but that we do help our citizens to just understand what it means to be Myaamia and have an understanding of what faith looked like within our community. And it's then up to the individual to decide how they live that out in their lives. So for some people, they are Christian and also have, you know, a more Myaamia based faith system, and those things can work together. And then for other people, that might look different. And so it's much more of on an individual basis rather than as a community having any specific faith within the whole community. A question about Miami, Florida. That's a question that we get often. There's some tentative connections that people like to make between here and there about some folks from Miami University going to Florida and influencing like Daytona and Dayton and then Miami. But the real answer is that Miami, Florida is an anglicization of an indigenous word in their area, just like Miami here is an anglicization of Myaamia. And so it's just two completely separate groups that to an English ear sounded like Miami. And so that's how we ended up with two different ones that are disconnected from each other.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks are also asking about ways to learn more, maybe an ILR class. We are actually working to create an ILR class in 2022. So that will be part of our 50th anniversary celebration. Will be other educational sessions across Oxford. So we're working with the Community Arts Center as well as with Lane Library to get more educational sessions similar to this one up. And then hopefully once we're able to physically gather again, we could do more activity-based things. So, talk about art forms, do language learning, play some games, those types of things once we can get together.
Looks like there's a question from Veronica. Do you see that one?
I do. It's hard to answer that question. I think for me, it's hard to answer because we're in the middle of this process of cultural revitalization. It's still an ongoing thing. And I think that the idea of what is a Myaamia identity is, again, a very personal thing. But we have a variety of ways that we teach about language and culture, primarily through community programs. And we started out with summer camps for our youth. So our first summer program was for ages 10 to 16. And now we've expanded that to 6 through, and then now we've opened it up for adults as well. So summertime programs where we can physically get together, do language and cultural learning, and then have folks do language learning throughout the entire year through community programs, workshops around the country, those types of things. And then, I think one of the main ways that this happens is that folks are finding their own way to create community among individual people. So, you might have a small group of Myaamia people that you see or talk to on a regular basis and that you are practicing these things with. And, that might look different for different people. So if I'm really interested in art, I might seek out other folks who do ribbon work as an art form and create that kind of community versus other folks who might really like to play lacrosse and they have a group of folks that they play lacrosse with. And so, I think that's one of the exciting things about our cultural revitalization work is that it's now become expanded where there's something for everybody to become interested in and other people who are interested in those same things and ways to make connections within our community.
Looks like there's
somebody asked about, about reparations. Mm-hmm. We could get pretty into the weeds here, but I don't think that's necessary, except to say that this happens on a variety of different levels. So the United States had a system of trying to provide compensation for ceded lands through the 80s and 90s. I believe. And so lots of tribal people did receive money from the government through those programs. But most people actually come back to the agreements that were made through those treaties for things like education and health care, those types of things. So ongoing work like the Indian Health Service, like money for education, that they would like to make sure that the United States government is keeping those promises. And, you know, they are in some cases and aren't in others. And so, you know, there's a lot of discussion that could happen there, and a whole lot of lawyers whose entire work it is to be evaluating whether those treaties are being upheld. And so, you know, I think that's more, again, of a personal question for folks. I don't know of any like ongoing projects within our community that deal with reparations. A message about non-Native folks who are raised Christian and absorbed Native American beliefs regarding sustainability and preservation of the environment. I think that, you know, obviously I am a big proponent of environmentalism and of maintaining our environment. I would just be really cautious about anybody who says that they are integrating anything that's a Native American belief, because from my perspective, that doesn't really exist. There are individual tribal nations who have different ways of knowing. And so from a Myaamia perspective, we have very specific beliefs about the ways that we interacted with our environment. And so we teach that primarily within our own community, but I do think that there are ways that that could be applicable to other groups as well. Primarily just the thought that we have relationships with our entire environment, not just with human beings. So that includes, you know, animals and plants, the environment as a whole, and that we have a responsibility to them. And that if you don't take care of our non-human relatives, that there are consequences. And I think that lots of folks believe that, you know, some of the things that are happening today within our environment are a consequence of that misbehavior. And so, you know, I'd be happy to chat a little bit more about that, but that's kind of a high level view of our belief system. A question about, for folks who are not Myaamia, how they can be engaged without appropriation. I think, to me, learning is so important. This education doesn't happen within our K-12 system right now. There are very few pieces about Native American history and culture that are included in, especially the Ohio standards, but I think across the United States. So there's so much learning that has to happen. But I would just be cautious about the, you know, what are you reading and where are your sources coming from? So I would always be a proponent of lots of the research that's coming out of our office. So on our webpage, we do have a resources tab that has several different publications that have come out of our office, both academic papers, but we do actually publish books, might be too extreme of a description, but 40 to 50 page books about several different topics. So about our removal or about our time in Kansas, about the allotment process. And that if you're interested in being very tribally specific and learning about Myaamia things, that is where I would definitely point you to. In addition, if reading's maybe not your learning style, we have a YouTube channel that has lots of videos, including recordings of all of our past Myaamia conference presentations. And those are very, I think, easy and digestible presentations that are usually a half an hour or less, where you could. Jim mentioned again, asking about Jesuits and involvement with our nation. I don't know of any connection between Jesuits and the Myaamia nation. I would have to probably go to our elected officials and ask them that question. I think I maybe answered all of the questions, but it's possible I missed some.
You did a great job, and thank you so much. I mean, wonderful presentation. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments before we wrap up? That you can unmute yourself as well if you wanted to ask Kara something directly. Seeing a lot of thank yous. No, nothing else. Well, I did put those 2 links in there that she just mentioned, and I'm happy to send out a list of those resources that were in your PowerPoint. If you want to get those to me, I can send them to everyone who registered. So yeah, thank you so much to everyone who attended today, and thank you to Kara. I mean, it was great. I learned so much about this, about the center and the relationship and the history. I think everyone's really grateful for you being here with us today. Did you have any final closing remarks you want to leave everyone with, or any last words?
No, I would just say, Missionewe, thank you very much for coming. And like I said, if you're here in the Oxford area over the next year and a half, especially, there will be a lot of programming similar to this one. So we're happy to engage with folks and do even more of this type of education. I really appreciate everyone engaging with this material and asking questions. And I hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you so much. I thank you to everyone. Have a great night, and we'll get those resources out to you. So just thank you so much for participating, and thank you, Kara, for your time. Have a good night,
Yes,
everyone.
absolutely. Thanks.